Morning, NANOG people. If I sound like someone ran over my throat last night, for the second NANOG in a row, I made the mistake of yelling too loud over the music to try and talk to people at the party last night. So I woke up with no voice, and I got it back just in time. So this talk is about a tool that I wrote about a year ago, I guess December '04, that was designed to enhance some of the existing tools that were available for IRR. So, quick review for anyone that doesn't know what IRR is. And actually, I should have put what prefix filtering is. I was kind of surprised with the number of people that came up to me in the past couple of days and didn't know why you needed IRR. Anytime you have a provider and a transit provider and a customer speaking BGP, you need to have a filter set up so that the customer cannot announce whatever they want. This cannot be propagated across the world. You cannot just allow anyone to announce anything. People make mistakes, people make configuration errors, and even if it's not malicious, people routinely make configuration errors at leak full tables, leak partial tables. So there needs to be some form of filtering in place. If you don't filter your customers at all, I feel sorry for you. Let me know who you are, and we'll take action afterwards. So IRR is a loose collection of databases which allow BGP-speaking networks to document their routes, policies, and anything else under the sun. If you've ever read the RPSL spec, you literally can document anything. It's very comprehensive. It currently speaks a language known as RPSL. There's some extensions called RPSLNG that adds V6 multicast, any other stuff like that. There's a lot of databases of different types. In the US, probably the most interesting one is the RADB. There's also some free services that are unsupported. AltDB, probably the most popular. Many providers that run IRR themselves run their own, Vario Level 3 Savvis being the big, well-known ones. And outside of the US particularly, there's the RIR run databases. So, my lengthy list of why IRR filtering is better than manual filtering. Number one, manual filtering takes a lot of time. It doesn't seem like much when you've got a small network, when you've got a couple customers, or when you don't have a lot of routes. But by the time you're a huge network with thousands of routes and hundreds of customers speaking BGP, you're going to have a lot of people spending time going through, making updates, verifying updates, typing things out. Manual update process is very slow, and if you've ever had to wait for someone to get around and process an update, you know how bad this is. Sometimes people do it in 4 hours, sometimes they do it in 48 hours, sometimes they're gone for the weekend, sometimes they, not to name any names, but sometimes they change their BGP at alias so that it forwards to nowhere for 5 days and don't notice. It's a slow process. Especially true if you have a customer of a customer of a customer and you have to work this all the way up to a tier 1. It can take some time. Humans make mistakes. I've seen this on a regular basis. Someone misses a decimal place, off by 1, typos a number while they're preparing things. Even if they use scripts and they're cut and pasting and they miss a line, suddenly you've got a prefix that's not being accepted, that's not being routed. That can be an outage, or you're allowing prefixes you shouldn't be, and bad things happen. Like I said, filtering small customers is easy. Filtering large customers, not so much. What a lot of people tend to do is once a customer reaches a certain size, they just kind of assume that, okay, maybe these people are clueful enough now. Whatever that size may be it 500, 1,000, 5,000. It's not necessarily a safe assumption to make. There's a lot of people that want to use IRR in a more reliable basis. Obviously, we've already seen that filtering peers is more work than anyone's willing to do, especially for large peers. Yeah, I know there's some lists on some exchanges where people will send to the list, I'm going to announce a new prefix today. Everyone please update your filters. But most of the time that doesn't happen, that doesn't scale. It just doesn't work. And obviously it's only going to get worse from here. Routing table continues to grow. Now's the time to fix it. So, why doesn't everyone use IRR? A lot of people actually do. European use is really almost total, and I talked to a bunch of people about why this is, and they seem to think that every provider it's accepted at this point. Every provider requires it. The RIPE really supports it along with the registration policy, so it's accepted, commonplace there. In the U.S., not so much. The major networks that use it, NTT Vario, NTT America, whatever you call it today, Level 3, Savvis, and then there's the list of people that don't use it. Or some of them have an IRR entry, but it's wrong, like an AS set that just lists customer AS ins, not AS sets, or it doesn't even list their own num record. There's a lot of confusion going on out there. So I went around trying to figure out why people didn't use it. Probably the biggest answer is that it was too complex. They said for every one BGP speaking customer who uses IRR, there's 50 who have no hope of figuring it out. And it's not that it's rocket science, it's just not well documented. It's a very complex language. You can state anything, and people don't know what to state, what they should be stating, how they should be stating it, the rules and practices. And quoting one quasi-tier 1 said, look at our AS set, we can't even figure it out. How do you think our customers are going to? Your support costs actually go up if you have to spend your time teaching customers how to use the IRR. Bottom line, that's why Vario, Level 3, and Savvis run their own registries. If their customers screw up, they can go in and edit them. But that's a lot of support time. There's a large learning curve on these kind of things. Whereas manual filters have no learning curve. You just send in an email and it's taken care of. Yet also most networks are not interested in providing a list of their customers. That's just business practice. So when you see import-export and you have a complete list, and some people put in IRR a complete list of neighbors, every session that they have, and it's an information database, but it's also a sales mining opportunity. And even with networks with strong IRR support, there's a lot of customers that just don't get it, and when a customer doesn't get it and says, I'm going to go to someone else who will support me, what they tend to do is say, okay, fine, we'll proxy register you. So anything they see in BGP, they register, which is counterproductive to filtering BGP. This also ends up polluting the databases. There's a lot of people who proxy register for others that they shouldn't. There's people who proxy register existing entries that don't know what's going on. And since they're in the maintainer, you can't get rid of their entries without asking them. And there's no controls, in the US at least, on people registering stuff in your space. And also that the existing tools were not sufficient to actually deploy IRR filters in production. And that's basically what I can fix, at least here. So I wrote this tool to help automate all the things that you actually need to do to deploy IRR in production. There's a lot of existing tools out there that download routes, but there's a lot of other things that need to go on. And some of this is kind of feature duplication. I noticed that my tool output originally ended up looking almost exactly like Vario's. In that there's only so much you can do with this, but this is the only public tool that I know of that's available, which is why I decided to make it available. So the steps that are required, you need to retrieve the prefixes on a regular basis, be it hourly, bi-daily, daily, however you choose to do it. There's an automated fetching process where you have a list of customers and a list of the objects that are going to be mapped to them. You need to pull that data down. You need to filter it for bogons, undesirable routes, things that you do not want people to be able to register and announce, and that's just good practice. You may have your own levels of filters on top of that for your export. You probably should, but it's another good opportunity to do it now before they even think that they're getting RFC 1918 space into BGP. It handles automatic aggregation of prefixes, uses a tool by Joe Abley, which is really nice, called Aggregate. It handles the tracking and long-term recording of prefix changes. Does this via CVS, which may or may not be the best tool, but it is a script, so it gets the job done. There's also a lot of publicly available programs, CVS Web, things like that. There's utilities that you can go browse the changes, and you can go back and see when someone registered a route, when they removed a route. There's some accountability for what's going on and tracking changes. It also handles emailing the customer and the ISP to let them know that, hey, we've detected a change. Lets the customer know that you've got their change, that you're going to be processing it and implementing it. It lets the ISP know that, hey, I need to pay attention to this ASN now. It handles exporting the data for non-IRR networks, which I call the NAG process. If you've got a transit provider who is IRR based, you just hand them your object. If you've got a transit provider who isn't, you can put them in the NAG system, and it will translate your changes to standard email and send it out to them and say, hey, time to update your database, so you don't have to do that manually. And it also generates router configuration for easy deployment. Right now it does Juniper, Extreme, Cisco. There's plenty of room to add any other things if anyone else wants to submit the format, but we haven't seen any requests yet. So this is a very pragmatic tool. It is not the end-all and be-all of IRR. It does not address every feature you can possibly imagine. It doesn't handle import and export policies at all, which by definition means it won't do AS path filters, or it will, but it won't do them right. It doesn't deal with filter set, router set, peering set, iNet router, any of the 50 other objects that you can register. It just tries to be very simple. Here's a list of prefixes registered behind an AS set, registered behind an OTNUM. This tool was actually originally built on top of IRR toolset, and what ended up happening was we got a lot of feedback from a lot of network engineers that they weren't able to compile it. Whatever's going on, I don't know, but it was difficult. And we actually experienced some problems when we were trying to deploy it. We had to make configuration changes in order to get it to compile on FreeBSD. The binary images wouldn't run on the latest operating system, and there were some versions of code that were actually pulling down incorrect answers. So we ended up rewriting it to not use it. It wasn't a critical piece of the code that ended up doing the queries. So we just wrote around that. It builds upon the queries and adds all the features that you need to actually use IRR in production. So some example usage. There's a database file that contains an ASN, a customer object, and an email for the customer to let them know what's going on, where they when they got an update. There's an exclusions file that lists bogons. You can pull that down from many publicly available sources. There's a general configuration file, and there's a NAG configuration file for talking to transit providers. So here's an example of a run of the fetch process where it just runs through, pulls out the data, adds it in CVS. There's a aggregated and a non-aggregated version. Here's an example of the database that's stored. It's flat files for right now, so you can adapt other tools to do things with it. You can see the value of aggregating, even when people think that they're aggregating already. If you're going to deploy things in the routers, which is my policy personally, is to deploy them with up to 24 so that people are allowed to announce more specifics as needed without having to call the NOC and say, hey, I need to do this. It reduces the complexity of the config that needs to go on your routers. I believe Todd and Tom and a couple of people addressed this at the last NANOG with a presentation on how far routers would scale to handling large prefix lists, and some of the answers weren't that good. So it helps to be able to aggregate that data as much as possible. You can also turn off the accepting up. You can turn off accepting more specifics, and it will still aggregate down unnecessary routes. Here's an example of the English version of the output. Not to call it any names, cogent, but there were some knocks that weren't able to understand the plus and the minus in a diff, so we had to translate to English, add, remove. There's a list of...
Patch? Sometimes patch works through diffs.
You know, I don't think they tried patching their router files, but maybe they should. So there's, at the top, there's a list of changes. The default format is English. You can change it back to diff mode. You can change it to full diff so that you can actually, you know, if you really want to apply the diffs against your own files, you can. You can change it back to just a summary of plus and minus, or you can leave it in the default of English. And then there's a complete list so that everyone can skim through it, see what's there, make sure that everything is the way it should be. There's an example of the prefix generation code. You tell it the format that you want, and it generates a prefix that's going to be suitable for using. Some people may or may not want the conft in there. It depends on whether you're TFTPing the config or you're doing it via a script or using rancid and a reverse roll. You can take that out. The Juniper code, there's some example Juno script and things like that, utilities that will let you upload the configs. So here's an example of nagging the providers. You know, hello, this is an automated message from you backwards, you know, to you backwards people who are still not using IRR. It provides everything that they need in order to update your information. And you can change this as just default text, but generic default text that seems to work. So you can download this from irrpt.sourceforge.net. It's been available for a while. There's been some recent development. There's always room for more development. So I'm looking forward to hearing a lot of features. It's been deployed by a few people in the peering community who've been testing it and giving me a lot of feedback on it. But this is probably its first wide-scale use. So if anything breaks, let me know. If there's any features that need to be added, let me know, and we'll turn around and get those things deployed pretty quickly. There's a lot of future plans for development on this. Right now, it needs IPv6 support. The reason that it doesn't do IPv6 support, for anyone that wants to know, there are actually two query protocols for IRR. One is based off RADB, and one is based off what RIPE uses. And the RADB tool version of it is actually a faster protocol in that you can query an AS set and have the server break it down to a list of component autonomous systems, whereas the RIPE version, it only breaks it down one level. So for if you've got a deeply nested AS set, you've got a transaction latency back and forth, and if you've got this going over to something far away, like if you're in the US and you're querying who is that RIPE, and there's any kind of significant transaction latency, what you tend to see is that the server times out before you can get the data. And I guess the RIPE servers have a default hard timeout of 3 minutes where they close the socket and don't finish returning the answer. So there needs to be support written in this in order to handle that, and that's just complicated. And the RIPE version is the only version that supports IPv6 objects. There's just no support in the RADB version right now. There's been a lot of requests to convert this to an SQL backend that may or may not make sense. What I tried to do in this is assume that you're going to have your own system for managing your own routers. So we didn't do anything that was SQL based right now because we didn't want to see how it would interact with other people's existing systems. But if you're a small company and your list of 1 or 2 routers, that's fine. If you're a larger company and you've got 100 routers, you probably have your own database with your own configuration and information. So we tried to make this generic, simple, and not require anything too complex other than PHP, the aggregate tool from Joe Abley, CVS, basic stuff you would find on any operating system. The next project that I will be talking about, next NANOG more than likely, is IRR Web. The goal there is to put up a web version of IRR so that end users can register routes without needing to know anything about RPSL. We're hoping that that makes the process so easy that everyone can do it, that every large network can just send their customers there and say, register for an account, type in your list of prefixes, it's done. And it's easy to maintain, you can click and delete and add and things like that. So that's future development. If you want to play with it right now, it's up. You can register routes, see how it works. If anything breaks, let me know, but it doesn't publish anywhere yet. That's the gist of it. I'm sure there's going to be comments anytime you say anything about IRR. So,
Excellent. How do we make these mics, John?
mhm.
Hello.
Hi. Did I interrupt you?
Hmm?
Is it my turn?
Go ahead.
Yeah.
Ask a question.
Go.
I have a shameless plug. It's very nice to hear people talking about the IRR, by the way. The RADB, which you mentioned a couple of times, is developed by Merit, and the two primary developers are here. Many of you have exchanged email with Chris Frazier, who's our main customer interface now. He's around. I'm not sure if I can't see who's in back there. He may be sitting at the back table. Larry Blunk is the RPSL NG person. He's here as well. He's a very fair guy. And if you have any questions about the RADB, I will be very glad to point you to these guys. Thank you.
One thing I should have mentioned, the RADB is actually the most comprehensive database. So the way the mirroring system works, you don't get, if you mirror someone who mirrors 5 other people, you don't get the 5 other people, you only get that one person. So everyone needs to configure a full mesh of everyone in order to get this data when someone turns up a new IRR database. RADB is definitely the most comprehensive version of that. It seems to connect with everyone. The RIPE version doesn't. A lot of the other people don't have full mirrors, so if you're running your queries, the best place to do it is against the RADB.
Great. Oh my God, it works. Freaked me out. I know that policy is one of the most exciting things to start the morning off with, and I know it's actually the thing that ISPs live and breathe for, is to think a lot about policy. But this stuff is obviously important. I've got a couple questions, and then if other people have questions, please come up to the mic and ask them. Richard, the filters that it builds, are those prefix list only, or are they prefix list plus ASPath, or? So
we actually had a request for ASPath. What it does right now is simply build based off of autonomous systems behind other autonomous systems in AS sets, which may or may not be the best way to go about doing it. It actually, in the latest code, does contain a list of AS sets. I'm not sure that I would recommend using it as such. I'd like some feedback on that to see how well it matches and how well it doesn't match. I was thinking that in order to do it properly, you would need to add import and export support, which we're not doing right now. But the majority of the project is intended to deploy prefix filters.
Okay, good. Randy.
Randy Bush, IJ. Like V6, this meeting marks the 10th anniversary of when I stood up there and tried to push the routing registries. And that was Washington, D.C., where Bob Metcalf ate his paper. The adoption rate has not been great for this either. I have not been successful selling it very well. What's wrong?
I think I listed a lot of what people seem to think was wrong early on, and that's where I'm taking a multi-phase approach to try to address some of that by making it simple for everyone to use, making it simple for providers to use. There's a lot of providers that don't have the time to go out and individually script this, so that's where I'm really trying to put this tool out so that everyone will be able to use it. And, you know, eventually when there's a high enough acceptance rate, maybe this will become the standard way to operate in the U.S. as well. I certainly hope so.
So just a follow-up question on Randy's question. So your take on this is, as I understand it, that the tools have been too difficult to use, and that's a major barrier to adoption. And also what you mentioned was it's not integrated into the allocation process.
Exactly.
So this addresses the first of those, right, but doesn't really touch the second at all.
Right. Well, there's multiple processes here. The first is the existing tools don't address everything that you need to do to actually deploy this in production. The existing tools are also difficult to use or difficult to compile and operate. Whether they work or not, they're probably, this is not a replacement for those tools, by the way, because those are the Swiss Army knife. This is a chainsaw. If you want to actually cut through something, let's get it done. But it's not going to screw anything in or open wine bottles. The other problem is ease of use for the end user, which hopefully IRR Web is intended to address. And the other problem is integration with the RIRs. And a lot of the benefit of the integration you see because you're closely related to who's doing the allocations and who's managing the IRR stuff. You can say, we know that this customer has this block. We're going to have a record that says only they can register space in it. And anyone else that wants to go register their space so they can start hijacking routes or whatever the case may be, it needs to be verified by that person. Whereas right now, there's no connection between the allocation authority and the IRRs in the U.S. So anyone can register anything and you can get away with it. In fact, if you don't use AS123:, people can actually register stuff in your AS set too, and make you start registering for routes that you don't announce.
Did you want to do a follow-up to that, Randy?
Yeah. I think in V6 we're trying to tweak the allocation policy when essentially we have something that's not selling. And I think we're at the wrong end of this too. I've been hacking tools to deal with this stuff for a long while. And I think the basic problem is that there's no critical mass, so it doesn't solve the problem. No matter how good the tools I have to apply it, the paint doesn't cover the surface. And as you say, the substrate, the IRR, it's the Internet Routing Registry itself, the data are poor. I think, unlike V6, who has been unwilling to go re-examine what's really wrong and work on it, here I think that is being done. And I think the path is the certification chain for allocations with real verifiable crypto certificates and keys from those certificates actually, okay, that formally make the data correct or make the data verifiable, okay, and are checkable by everybody and so on and so forth. And then, and the tool set that works with that, and I think you'll be cooking with gas, as the idiom goes in the States.
I agree with you completely, and if someone can actually write a system that does that effectively, that would be a priority for integration in this tool.
So if I can do moderator jujitsu on Randy's last comment, that turns into a plug for two things. One is a talk that Randy's giving later this morning that was added to the schedule, so please check the agenda, because I suspect, given the title of the talk that I saw, that he will be commenting on that. And the other is that Richard will be talking at the Tools BOF this afternoon in some more detail about the IRR toolset, and we'd also like to use that as an opportunity to have more discussion about IRR. So we'll take the last two comments over here and then move on. Please.
Andrew Dahl, Boeing. I wanted to bring everyone's attention to a policy that's currently being proposed in the Erin region to modify the org template to include a field that's optional to put your ASN in. So there are people who think that this would create an authoritative register that would link autonomous systems and organizations and the routes that they're allocated. Hopefully in the future that could be a very useful database that, while not perfect, may contain a lot of valuable information that tools like this could also pull from to extract data to build a good routing policy. I encourage you to discuss the list on the ARIN PPML list. If you agree or disagree or think more, or even if it maybe should be mandatory field at some time in the future.
Good.
Ideally, the best way to address this would be a standardized protocol between RIPE, ARIN, APNIC, and everyone else, so that we can actually
Don't forget the third ropes. Well, come on.
LACNIC and everyone else, so that we can actually use one tool to handle this. I'm not sure what ARIN's progress is towards enhancing their IRR support. I can tell you from personal experience, I had a customer who tried to register a V6 route, or a Route 6 object in the ARIN IRR, and it crashed the server, and they said, we don't know if we support V6 yet, but don't do it again.
Sandy Murphy, Sparta. I wasn't actually going to mention the policy on the ARIN list. I'm actually the person who submitted that policy. I hope no one noticed my lips moving while the previous comment was being made. But I am curious about there is a definition of a security model for the RPSL language. It's many, many years old. Would the tools that you are suggesting have any way of verifying the authorization that's defined in that sort of thing?
I'm not aware of any of those specifications, so I couldn't tell you.
Oh, okay. Well,
definitely something I'd want to look at.
I think RIPE, from what I'm told, implements it. It's things like if you're putting in a route object, you have to have the authorization of the prefix holder and the AS number.
Right.
So, it's a...
Right, that seems to be the way that the RIPE handles it. But like I said, this is presented at NANOG, and the way that I was coming at it was, what can we do to get U.S. operators on the same level as everyone else? So where we're at right now is supporting the features that are available on the U.S. IRR servers. And if we can get those features deployed, then I'd love to be able to support them.
You made some reference to the separation between the allocation registries and the route registries, and there's this need for tying the authorization for the prefix to the authorization to speak, and the AS number to the authorization to put things in the route registry, and that sounds like a thing that really needs to get done.
Right. Okay. Yeah, part of the other problem with the IRR is there's a lot of legacy data out there. Anyone that has been around the net for 10 years will see some of their prefixes from 10 years ago still registered, sometimes not even by them. So that's definitely something that needs to be addressed.
Excellent. Thank you.